time for another deep dive. And this deep dive, we talk about Eddie Graham. Eddie Graham started wrestling, he debuted in wrestling in 1947 after being trained by Cowboy Luttrell. His first name in wrestling was Rip Rogers, teaming with Buddy Rogers as his brother, which is something I never knew. I also never knew that Eddie got his start in Texas. Did he get his start in Texas, or did he get his start somewhere else? I think he got his start in Texas. Probably should have wrote that down. But I did it. Or, no, it might have been Tennessee. Oh, no, it was Texas. Yeah, I thought so. I thought it was Texas. He would lose a loser leaves town match to Pepper Gomez. Pepper Gomez would also leave Texas soon after, becoming a massive star in California. But as most people know, Texas and California, or Texas and the West Coast, would have working arrangements for years to come. But either way, Eddie Graham would move on from Texas and move on from the name Rip Rogers to become Eddie Graham. Eddie Graham would be born in June 1958 when he began teaming with Dr. Jerry Graham and Crazy Luke Graham. Dr. Jerry Graham is actually who he was pictured with on the cover of this deep dive in the Wrestling Review magazine. Right here, in the fall of 1950, which is from the fall of 1959, or it's the fall issue of 1959. Eddie's on the right, Dr. Jerry Graham is on the left. The Graham family would later add Superstar Billy Graham to the group, and the Graham brothers would become one of the most successful villainous tag teams in wrestling history. They would take over the Northeast, becoming a big ticket tag team for Capital Wrestling in New York. The Graham brothers would become one of the first, in my opinion, top heel tag teams in New York, and would also produce a future world champion in Billy Graham. Not many tag teams can say that the Graham brothers, Dr. Jerry, Crazy Luke, Eddie would stay on top in New York for a long time, long enough for Billy Graham to have a sustained success and proven track record enough to become world champion later on in his career. But this run with the Graham brothers would set up Eddie's future relationship with Vince Sr. It was in 1960 Eddie Graham would leave the Graham family after 2 years with the group and head down to Florida, Championship Wrestling from Florida, to wrestle. Eddie would heat up the territory with a feud against one of the top heels of the era, Professor Boris Malenko, the father of Dean Malenko, and one of the top heels of the period in the southern United States. Eddie would take over the booking and promoting of the territory in 1971 from his former trainer, Cowboy Luttrell. Cowboy Luttrell had the office with the father brother, with I believe one of the Welch family. But I know Cowboy Luttrell was one of the top members of the office at the time, because of the CWF documentary that I watched, where they spoke about all this. But 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 Eddie would Eddie would not become the star overnight, the star of the territory overnight. It would take time because he was able to learn from Cowboy Latrell. Yeah. Yeah, Cowboy left because of health reasons in 1971, and Eddie took over complete control of the territory. Once becoming the promoter and booker, Eddie would start moving himself down the card to allow other stars to flourish. Eddie would start teaming, similarly to Giant Baba, when Giant Baba was aging out in his career. Eddie would start, Eddie would occasionally team with his son Mike. Eddie would help and assist because he realized, he would help and assist youngsters because he realized he could not stay on top forever. Because if he wanted his territory to succeed, he had to have other stars on top. And this is what led to guys like Jack Briscoe, Dory Funk, Terry Funk, Jerry Briscoe, for a time Gary Hart, and various other, I can't name everybody that Eddie Graham had influence over because I don't even know everybody that Eddie Graham had influence over because it just doesn't, it just doesn't add up, it's an immeasurable number. It's an immeasurable number. That's the best way to put it. But Eddie was also a part of one of the greatest moments in wrestling history, or one of the most iconic moments in wrestling history, because he was teaming with his son Mike the night that Dusty became the American Dream. Because on the opposite side of the ring from Pac Song and Dusty Rhodes was Mike and Eddie Graham. So Eddie was a part of that night for Dusty Rhodes, which Eddie and Dusty would be synonymous with each other for years, but we'll get to that. Eddie Graham's last match was against Terry Funk in 1982, and Eddie would be fixated on promotion until his passing in 1985. He would be done. Health reasons were what took him out of the ring. Eddie Graham was a genius. He was born to be in the wrestling business, and it is difficult for me to put into words the style that this man had, but exposition was most important. Everything that happened had a reason. Good versus evil, poor versus rich. The feuds were easy to follow and understand. Why two wrestlers were fighting each other. Why you should hate or like who you hate. It was clear who you were supposed to hate, who you were supposed to like. Simple reasons often lead to the easiest answers. Simple booking. It wasn't, oh, this guy did this, or blah 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 blah. It was easy, competitive feuds, or whatever, rich versus poor, good versus evil. This guy did something bad for him, and this guy, Jack Briscoe was, messed with by Duke Kiyomoto, and Jack Briscoe had to get revenge on Duke for doing something underhanded and evil and slimy and disgusting, and he needed to get revenge on him because who wouldn't want to get revenge on him? Or Hiro Matsuda, or Harley Race was coming into the territory, and somebody wanted to test themselves against the world's champion. Dory Funk and Terry Funk would always come from Texas over to Florida because of Eddie's relationship with Dory Funk Sr., which we'll get there. But Eddie made sure his programming was easy to relate to for his fans and easy to follow. Exposition, everything mattered. Everything had a reason. Everything counted. I remember a story where I don't remember who the wrestler was. It might have been Brian Blair, but Eddie Graham had Brian Blair, three drop kick, was told do three drop kicks, and do this, do that. But one of the spots was three drop kicks. He went to the back and asked Eddie, how was that? Blah 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 blah. Eddie said, you missed a drop kick. The amount of detail that Eddie had, the amount of detail that he would give out, the amount of intricate finishes that he would have in his mind, down to the detail, and he would be able to remember every single one of them. And the amount of chances he gave to people to book and to make a difference in wrestling is immeasurable. Because he would give people the smaller towns to learn how to book. He would give people the opportunity to learn how to book. Black Bart had a chance to book. Kevin Sullivan had a chance to book. Dusty Rhodes, Steve Kern, Mike Graham. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. It's impossible for me to hit everybody that Eddie had given the opportunity to have the book, because people had the book for the smaller towns, like for the house shows. And then he would take it for this, or they would book some of the card, or they would book their match, or whatever. Eddie was receptive because he loved training. It's like Ernie Ladd said, come over and sit under the learning tree. And everybody would want to sit under Eddie's learning tree. Everybody would want to spend time with the great Eddie Graham and learn even something, even a smidge of what they could from the man. I believe it was Mike Graham. I believe I read a story once that Mike Graham found Gordon Solie at a racing event, as Gordon Solie was the man over the loudspeaker commentating the race. And Eddie was the one who approached Mike. I mean, Mike was the one that approached Gordon to go meet with Eddie, and Eddie offered Gordon the job to come and be the announcer for Championship Wrestling from Florida. But he made sure that Gordon would come in and treat it with proper respect and treat it like a sport. In return, Eddie made sure that everyone knew there were two rules: no touching Gordon Solie and no insulting Gordon Solie, because Gordon was there to sell the product and treat it with respect, and you weren't selling a match with Gordon, you were helping Gordon sell your match. And if you didn't understand that, you were out. You were gone. Gordon was not a tool to help you get over. Gordon was there to help you get over. And that's something Bill Watts learned from Eddie Graham. And Bill Watts, because Bill Watts had to reset one of his interviews when he was in Florida, and then Jim Cornette had to do the same thing when he was insulting Boyd Pierce in Oklahoma when he was working for Bill Watts. Passing down, because Bill Watts was one of the people that Eddie Graham had an influence over. And Bill Watts was actually one of the people that Eddie Graham taught down in Florida when Bill Watts was in Florida, and gave his first opportunity to book to. J.J. Dillon, another guy. But now it's time, now we talk about the NWA World Champions that came through Florida. Jack Briscoe, which I think I spelled Briscoe's name wrong. That's how you spell the Briscoes nowadays. Dusty Rhodes, Harley Race, Dory Funk, Terry Funk, Gene Kaninsky spent time in Florida. they've spent time in Florida. Jack Briscoe and Dusty Rhodes, though, were the two that came from Florida, the two that built their name in Florida, the two that became stars and icons in Florida. But before we start talking about the NWA World Champion, we just gotta go back to Eddie's eye for talent. Because exposition. If Jack Briscoe wasn't on the card, Eddie Graham made sure that Gordon Solie would tell the fans where Jack Briscoe was, what Jack Briscoe was doing, and why Jack Briscoe wasn't there. Whether it was Jack doing a charity event, whether it was Jack doing something, or whatever, there was always a reason why somebody wasn't there. There was always a reason why somebody wasn't there, and there was always something that made sense. But Eddie kept his eyes on the details and continuity and exposition, and always gave a reason. He was that detail oriented that he never forgot. Just think about this for a second. Eddie Graham took over the office in Florida in 1971. The following year is when the Great Georgia War started between Ann Gunkel and the her All-Star Wrestling All South Wrestling, sorry, All South Wrestling, and Paul Jones's office Eddie Graham had that much weight. Eddie Graham's name carried that much weight that he was that much influence within the NWA, that he was one of the people they called to help boost the Georgia office. He chose who to send to Georgia to book in the NWA affiliated territory, and that was Bill Watts. Eddie Graham, within a year of becoming a promoter, within a year of becoming a booker, his name carried that much weight and that much influence that he helped assist the NWA in the Great Georgia War of 1972 and 1973, which the NWA affiliate obviously ended up winning. But not only that, it was Eddie Graham that helped Jack Briscoe and Dusty Rhodes become legend. And the big names that he helped influence, I mentioned some of them earlier, but Kevin Sullivan, Dusty Rhodes, Mike Graham, Bill Watts. Mike Graham had got the reputation of becoming one of the best finished men in the business, and you have to believe that one of the reasons why he became one of the best finished men in the business is because of his dad. Bill Watts and many others, and indirectly influencing Jim Cornette and Paul Heyman, because Kevin Sullivan mentored Paul Heyman, Eddie Gilbert mentored Paul Heyman, and Bill Watts mentored Jim Cornette. Yes, Jerry Jarrett did too, but Eddie Graham worked with the Welches and the Fullers, and so there was probably somewhere in there, but also Dory Sr. Dory Sr. is the one who trained Eddie Graham. Yes, Eddie Graham learned from Dory Sr. because Eddie Graham started in Texas. He worked with Dory Sr., and you have to think he sat under Dory Sr.'s learning tree and picked up whatever he could from one of the greatest minds in wrestling. Dory Sr. is one of those people that everyone had respect for, and I've never heard somebody say a bad thing about Dory Sr. But now, fast forward to 1979. Eddie has been in charge for, 8 years? 9 years almost? And Vince Sr. comes to him. Vince Sr. is looking for his next top guy. And he's coming down to Florida. He's seeing if Eddie has anybody. And Vince Sr. asks about this kid. I believe he asked about Steve Keirn first. Or no, he asked about Bob Backlund. He asked about Bob Backlund, the all-American boy. You know, he's looking for another guy to build his company around. Eddie says Steve Keirn would be the better choice, because at the time Steve and Bob Backlund were teaming together. Eddie says that Steve Keirn would be the better choice. He's more charismatic. He's a solid worker. Blah 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 blah. Vince Sr. bets Eddie that he could make Bob Backlund a star. We all know what happened. Bob Backlund was the one who beat, I believe it was Superstar for the belt. And the rest is history. Bob Backlund would hold the title for 2 years, dropping into the Iron Sheik, and then the Iron Sheik would make way to Hulk Hogan. But Eddie Graham had the influence. Imagine if it was Steve Keirn imagine if Vince didn't stick to his guns and stick with Bob Backlund and took Eddie's advice and went with Steve Keirn. Imagine Steve Keirn as WWF champion. What would have changed? Within a year or so, Steve Keirn was in the Fabulous Ones with Stan Lane, and they become one of the hottest tag teams in the world. Go figure. Steve Keirn would become one of the top trainers in wrestling. Steve Keirn would be able to keep on the Florida legacy and keep building the Florida legacy. I'm not saying that wouldn't have happened, but imagine Steve Keirn as a top guy in the WWF. It could have happened. Sadly, Eddie Graham passed away due to a self-inflicted gunshot wound, showing it took 2 self-inflicted gunshot wounds to do him in, or to really, but it shows how tough he was to the end. You don't believe me? Look it up. It was 2 gunshot wounds from Eddie. One, and then it blew out part of his cheek on the first one, and then he did another one, and that was it. Eddie battled alcoholism and depression for a long period of time, and there's a number of stories out there what made Eddie finally crack and what made him finally break and what was the trigger. I will not talk about him here. If you want to do some research on your own to see that part of it, it just shows that everybody, sometimes our demons get the better of us. But that doesn't change. I didn't realize that was the last one. That doesn't change the legacy that he leaves behind. Because the fact of the matter is, Eddie Graham is an icon. Eddie Graham is an icon because he's one of the few people that can sit here and say that he helped change wrestling. He helped change wrestling. Because without Eddie Graham, where would Dusty Rhodes be? Would Gordon Solie have entered wrestling? Jack Briscoe? Would the Funks versus the Briscoes have become such a heated rivalry during the golden era of wrestling? What about Kevin Sullivan? Would Kevin Sullivan have become a star? There are so many questions. Would Bob Backlund have become WWF champion? Because if Bob Backlund, if not for Eddie Graham, what would have happened to the Florida territory? What would have happened to the NWA? Because the amount of assistance and the amount of help that Eddie gave to the Georgia territory during the Wrestling War of '72, it's immeasurable. He gave them a booker. He gave them direction. He gave them stability. Eddie would send people up from Florida to Georgia to help, to make sure that the NWA had a stable presence in Florida. And that's one of the reasons why Eddie would serve 2 terms as president of the NWA. Eddie's booking helped shape so many future bookers, and not just Dusty Rhodes, because Dusty would take, you can guarantee that Dusty took what he learned from Eddie and brought it with him to Mid-Atlantic. J.J. Dillon, same thing. J.J. would go up to Canada and run his own territory for a time with the help of Eddie Graham. Eddie would send him archival footage up to use on his television programming. And then when J.J. came back down, J.J. looked to Eddie for a job. And he ended up getting one with Dusty because of the relationship that he had with Dusty from working with Eddie Graham. It is unquestionable that Eddie Graham is an icon. That Eddie Graham paved the way for the modern age of booking. Or for booking. He paved the way for bookers. He helped set the mindset that unfortunately went down to has been lost to the sands of time, because most people don't book like Eddie Graham anymore, because there was only one Eddie Graham. There was only one Eddie Graham. And this just shows that you can sit under the learning tree, but you can only learn so much, because sometimes the greatest teachers teach you everything they want you to learn, not everything that they know. But his stories are with those who worked with him. His legend lives on in the minds of those who saw him, and in the eyes of those who read his work and saw the legend in action. This has been another deep dive, and if you guys are loving these deep dives as much as I am putting them together, feel free to leave a comment down below. If you like the more documentary style of these deep dives, feel free to also let me know down below. I'm enjoying making, trying to make them more documentary-esque, but also if you guys know anybody that, if anybody that might be going through a hard time, pick up the phone, give them a call, shoot them a text, send them a message. You never know how much that might help, just to let them know that you're there. With that being said, feel free to leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel for more content just like this that you can only find right here at Wrestling Express, and I will see you next time for the next deep dive.